We can open with how willing you are to share like what you've made lately.
The way I normally say it when I don't get into numbers is that I'm basically personally making between all my streams of income what I was making as a television host on basic cable, with the provisos that A, that's like 8, close to 10 years ago. And B, I don't have budget anymore. I used to have, hundreds of thousands of dollars an episode. I could employ all these people to make a media product that I really cared about. And right now I work with, half a dozen freelancers, some of whom I, pay out of pocket using my own payroll, and some of whom are paid by my podcast production company that I work with. So it's been a big change in the way that I work for me. And, basically I left. I did a show for cable, then I did a show for Netflix. The Netflix show took 3 years because of the pandemic and also the new schedule of television. And I, right after that, sort of built a business for myself on the internet in a dedicated way. And so now my income is split between podcasting, YouTube, Patreon is a chunk of it, and then also live touring. And I honestly don't keep that much track of how much I make. It just sort of all goes into the bucket of my S Corp that I have. And then I pay myself twice a year, and that's kind of it. Just money flows in, then I pay myself with what's left. But I can comfortably say that for the past couple years, I've been making 6 figures by doing that, which is good. And I'm lucky to be able to. I'm like, I feel upper middle class in the influencer economy. I'm not Mr. Beast. It's not like exploding or going crazy, but I am one of the lucky ones who's actually able to make a business with this. Of course, a business that has no health insurance or, job security, but I'm doing all right.
When you look at what you've built, because I think about this a lot too, because I'm like, my revenue streams are very similar these days, and it's funny because I've gone through a similar transition too, from having a television show or two to now putting my income together through Twitch streaming and making YouTube videos and podcasting. I still have independent music as a career too, but that has been a sinking ship for a while anyway. But I'm curious, in terms of what you've built, do you feel like what you have in terms of your revenue streams, do you feel like what you have now is a sustainable machine, or do you feel like you still need to add things to it? Do you need to add any revenue streams, or do you feel like what you have now is a sustainable thing for the foreseeable future?
I've been working hard to make it more sustainable, and that means bringing on people who can do a chunk of the work, not for me, but with me, so that it's not all me gutting it out every single moment. The fact of the matter is that, I do, a weekly podcast. At this point, I'm doing twice a month YouTube videos, touring, and Patreon. You can't do any of that. You can't do all that together as a single person, right? So I have a social assistant who I pay by the hour to do my posts on social media and to post all the stuff on Patreon for all the Patreon backers. I have a couple of writers who I work with where, we have a meeting to decide what the video is going to be about, and then they outline it, and then they do the first draft, and I revise it. I am not the kind of writer where I don't really write solo. Like, I love to write with other people. That's sort of what helps me power through the ADD, talking about it with other people, brainstorming, working on a document together, and then I take the final draft after, they've integrated all my notes and stuff like that. Like, I need to sort of work in a head writer, showrunner sort of mold. I have a producer who, thank God, was a wonderful man named Tony, who, both records and edits my podcast, but also like liaises with the ad people and makes sure that, if there's a kerfuffle with, they thought the ad was coming out on the 18th, but it's actually needs to be pushed, or like we didn't get the script in time and we got to send it to them. Like, that is all so essential. Oh my God, something came up. I need to reschedule this record. You're right. Well, that's a 6-step task to even see if it can be rescheduled. And thank God I have people working with me who can handle that piece of it. The problem is they're all working for me freelance at this point, right? Mm-hmm. And they're being very patient. You know what I mean? Because they're making a couple $100 or a couple $1,000 a week or a month, right? They don't have health insurance. It's one part of their income. And yet they are sort of being accountable to me for their time, which, I think of freelancers being generous when they do that, right? You guys
Right.
work freelance. You know that you're doing other shit. And sometimes it's like, hey, I can't answer your Slack message at 8 p.m. because I'm a fucking freelancer, man. Right. And so what I want and what my goal is to build over the next year or two is to turn basically my one person operation, where it's me and a half a dozen freelancers, into an actual company where these people can be full-time employees. Right.
Yeah.
And then I can actually be like, oh my God, I've gainfully employed people. They are really on my boat. We are really sailing the seas together. We are not half in, half out with each other. But to do that, I have not seen a way to do that doesn't require upfront investment from some source. Like
Right.
I need
Funding.
somebody to give me some money and invest it to give myself a couple runways so that I can so that I can offer people that, right? Because like the minimum amount you'd want to pay somebody in Los Angeles, what's the absolute minimum amount? Let's say it's 50 grand, right? For someone, which I would say was a minimum 10 years ago. That like currently, that's just like 50 grand that I don't make. That I can't afford to do that.
Sometimes I feel like when we talk about the creator economy, or like those of us who are trying to like put something together that is something we care about, that's not just, don't mean to insult anybody here, but like a jobby job, right? We're all passing the same dollar around, right?
Mhm.
Like we're all just like employing each other. Maybe say that a different way. I think this is happening in the economy in general. We're all passing the same dollar around.
That's how the economy
who aren't making
works.
money off of those of us who aren't making money off of capital, right? Like those of us who are making money off of the money we already made. You could say that's how the economy works, except I think that there's this particular class that we really are almost literally passing the same dollar around.
Yeah. I mean, what's happened to I'll give you my general theory of what's happened to the media in general, which is that the main thing that's happened via the influencer economy is we've destroyed media infrastructure. It used to be that there were, these companies that made media. They employed hundreds of people. They had lawyers. They had upfront investment. When they offered you a job, they could give you a year contract. They had relationships with advertisers that had established quotes that they knew that they could fund everything off of, right? It's infrastructure. It's like building anything. It takes time to build it, right? You can't do it all at once. Then, the tech companies come in. They create the ability for anybody to upload anything and to make a little bit of money off of it. And that's where all of the eyeballs go, because the tech companies did a ruthless job of destroying traditional media and centralizing the eyeballs on themselves and making it impossible for magazines, even internet native video sites like College Humor, cable channels, made it impossible for any of them to make a living under their existing business model. So all those crumble, right? And all the talent, that's us, from journalism, from the music industry, from comedy, right, have to go directly to those platforms and build our businesses there. There's been some advantages, which is that, there's been a lot more accessibility. People from all over the country can now, show up on people's televisions on YouTube, right? But the disadvantage is it's destroyed the infrastructure. And so now you can no longer do journalism that requires 3 people to spend 1 year on an investigative story. You can no longer do a late night show that has the kind of joke writing that takes 10 nerds in a room. You can no longer, I don't know what the equivalent is for you, Mike. I'm sure you have some example. You can no longer give, some starting artist like, a couple $100,000 to cut their first album with actual resources, right? Now they have to do it in their bedroom. And that's like bad, because it's like that change, that destruction of infrastructure is simply bad. A, it makes the product worse, because now we no longer get that sort of, media that costs more money to make. And B, it makes everybody's job less secure. Now, my theory of the case is that in media, we're going to start rebuilding the infrastructure. That YouTube, just to take one example, is the platform. It's the cable company, right? Mm-hmm. But the channels are starting. Yeah, they're the aggregator. But the channels are starting to become more like cable channels. And big evidence for this, you see it every day in the Hollywood press. Mr. Beast is doing his own upfronts right now. He's doing his own. He and 2 other creators. There's a story about this in, I think, the Hollywood Reporter yesterday. The upfronts are the events where, for those who don't know, where the cable companies would say, here's all our new shows, advertisers, here's why, you should spend $1 million on Turner cable channels this year, right? I used to be at these when I had a show on cable. Like, they would make me go and say, hi, I'm Adam Conover. I used to have to shake hands with the literal people from Johnson & Johnson and say, yes, please advertise on my show. So the point is, the very high end of the YouTubers, right? Mr. Beast is literally having his own upfronts because he is trying to create that kind of like revenue for himself. What happens when he does that? He is now a cable channel, right? And he could afford to produce larger things, right? He could afford to actually invest money. I mean, the guy already employs tons of people under horrible working conditions, but like, it's impossible to look at that and not say, oh, this man is building the new cable, right? And there are other people who are trying to do scripted media on YouTube, etc. And that's why I'm looking at it and going, okay, the job for me now, unfortunately, is to try to build a business infrastructure to produce the kind of content that I want. You can still make money being like a solo person, right? But you can't do it with the kind of resources. If you want the resources, you have to go build them for yourself, and you have to like find someone who can invest the money up front. So for instance, at some point, all the journalists who left to Substack, some of them are going to have to get together in a big enough bundle that they can like sell access to all of themselves for $5
and create a newspaper or magazine is what you're saying.
Yes, literally. And literally create a newspaper or a magazine. And, I think in 20 years, we're going to look back at this and say, oh, new boss, same as the old boss. And hopefully the period that we're in right now will be an unfortunate blip where all that infrastructure is dead. But eventually we're going to need this media ecosystem to mature, just like radio did in the 40s, just like cable did in the 90s. The same thing's going to happen. And we're just going to be watching it on YouTube rather than fucking Spectrum. Sorry, you're going to have to keep paying Spectrum because you're going to need to pay them for the cable bill. But that is what I think is going to happen. And that's the transition that I'm trying to figure out how to get myself across right now.
I'm curious about, you have writers that you work with for your YouTube.
Yeah.
I once watched a YouTube video that made my blood run cold. It was a guy who had a very successful channel talk about why he was quitting YouTube. And what he was saying was that the rough thing about YouTube as a revenue stream is that you can spend a week's worth of time working on a video, and it doesn't guarantee that it's going to make the income that you need it to make. And so I think about that a lot in terms of my YouTube channel. There's things that I want to talk about that I feel like are more risky, and I'm less willing to do it because I need the videos to keep performing well. For you being in a position where you're hiring other people, which means these videos have to be delivering revenue, do you contend with risk at all in terms of the subjects that you're choosing to explore? Like, do you feel very sure that all of them are going to do well all the time? Or are you ever concerned that, oh, this one might be a swing and a miss, and then does that sort of mess up the economy for your YouTube?
The lucky thing right now is that all my videos for the year are already fully funded, and I'm in a position where I'm not personally taking the financial risk. So when I was starting out doing the YouTube monologues that I do, I've been doing them for about 2 years. I was literally just paying people out of pocket. I'd ask a friend who's a comedy writer, hey, can you help me like break this outline and, help me on the drafts and help me do punch up, get a producer I know to come literally shoot me in my bedroom. Okay, how much? You're going to cost $500. You're going to cost $300. Okay, great. Let me pay all you guys. Literally, I use a payroll platform called Gusto that like generates W-9s for people. And I was doing that for the first couple videos. And I was honestly taking a loss on them because they were an experiment. And I'm luckily in a financial position where I'm like, yeah, I can spend $2,500 on a video, $3,000 on a video. Isn't more than that, but mid to low four figures in order to just like try this out creatively. Then it worked. And then I started getting, around that same time, I got a reach out from a sponsor called USA Facts, which is Steve Ballmer's nonprofit that like aggregates facts and puts them online. They wanted to do some videos, and we were able to do a little deal. So I did like 6 videos with them, maybe 5 in like 2023. In 2024, I brought it to my podcast company that I work with, which is HeadGum /Gumball. Those are the two halves of the company. And I was already doing my podcast with them, for which they were paying the production budget. And we worked out a deal where I won't get into all the details because we adjusted the deal a couple times, but basically they pay for the production budget for these and they get the exclusive rights to sell ads on them. And so in 2024, we did another half dozen. And then for 2025, they were able to get one of our sponsors, Ground News, to agree to sponsor 24 videos for the year. And so now we're just doing 24 monologue videos this year. That's in addition to the podcast videos. And so that way, each one of my writers knows we have basically sort of one research producer and one comedy writer. They both sort of, split roles a little bit. Their names are Sam and Andra. They're very talented, wonderful people. They know that like, all right, I'm doing this many videos this year with Adam and, it's a little bit more reliable for them. And so that sort of helped us reach a plateau where not every video is such a risk and where we can try stuff out. And, if one video gets on the low end, these monologues might get 250,000 views. We also just had one that got 1.8 million. And so the sponsor is going to be generally happy with that. And they're not counting on every single one. If I was trying to do the style, there's some people on YouTube who do no ad sponsorships and they make all of their income off of the YouTube rev share and off of Patreon. And these are some of my favorite people on YouTube. ContraPoints and H Bomber Guy are two examples of people who
love
fantastic.
Love his 4-hour video on plagiarism.
Incredible.
Highly recommend it to everyone. I know that sounds like you won't possibly sit through it. Trust me.
Incredible, right? Yeah. And ContraPoints is what a 3-hour video on Twilight was like. I was like, this should be taught in grad schools. It's like a work of original philosophy that's getting millions of views. But these folks have got themselves incredibly healthy Patreon numbers, and B, but also it is a much riskier enterprise, right? To try to spend 6 months of your life making one video that needs to perform well. It also would really trigger my perfectionism. I need a faster cadence or I'll drive myself nuts. If I spend that much time on something, I'll never get it done. So there's all different ways to mitigate the risk that you take. And I'm lucky enough to have gotten myself in a position where I have regular sponsorship. So we can just crank them out and not stress too much. But the live or die by the performance of each individual post, that's death to a creator. You have to get yourself out of that hole, or you're gonna sink. You cannot operate that way long term. And that's why people burn out. That's why so many YouTubers make that video. That's why I'm quitting. Because if you're just trying to make your money off of straight algo, you will drive yourself fucking nuts.